The atmosphere in the Oval Office is hermetically sealed, a vacuum of high stakes where the air conditioning hums a low requiem for the post-Cold War order. The resolute desk now supports a document that threatens to set the Pacific on fire. It is the U.S.-Taiwan Trade and Investment Framework, colloquially and dangerously known in intelligence circles as the Silicon Pact. The President of the United States sits with a posture of calculated resolve, the scratching of his pen the only sound in the room. Standing behind him are the architects of this moment, the Secretary of Commerce, looking triumphant, and the National Security Advisor, looking ill. The deal is unprecedented in its scale and audacity, representing a $500 billion bilateral agreement. It is not merely a trade deal, it is a geopolitical transplant. The terms are stark. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, will commit $250 billion to expand its gigafab cluster in Arizona, effectively mirroring its Hsinchu production capacity on American soil. In return, the U.S. government pledges $250 billion in credit guarantees to Taiwan's supply chain to relocate alongside the giant. To the American public, sold on the nightly news, this is bringing jobs home and securing the future of AI. It is the fulfillment of a friend-shoring strategy designed to make the U.S. immune to supply chain blackmail. But to the rigorous analysts at the CIA and the Office of Naval Intelligence, the signing ceremony looks like the removal of a hostage's shield. For 40 years, Taiwan has relied on the silicon shield, the theory that its indispensability to the global tech economy protects it from Chinese invasion. If Beijing attacks, the world's economy halts. Therefore, the world will not let Beijing attack. By moving the crown jewels of semiconductor manufacturing to the Arizona desert, the U.S. is effectively saying it no longer needs the island to keep its lights on. The shield is being dismantled, piece by silicon piece. The president lifts the pen and flashbulbs erupt, freezing the moment in a strobe-lit staccato. It is dead of night in Beijing, but the compound of the Chinese leadership is awake. Xi Jinping, older now, his face a mask of impassive gravity, watches the Americans celebrate the hollowing out of Taiwan. To the Chinese Communist Party, the Silicon Pact is not an economic agreement. It is an act of strategic theft. It is the final confirmation that the United States intends to strip Taiwan of its value and then abandon the husk. The peaceful reunification narrative, sustained for decades, evaporates in the glow of the monitors. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Wang Yi, breaks the silence with a statement drafted for immediate release. He warns that the U.S. has crossed a red line that should not have been touched. Words are no longer the currency of the realm, and Xi turns to his generals. The plans for Justice Mission 2026 have been on the shelf for months, refined by lessons learned from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The operation is designed not as a chaotic invasion, but as a strangulation. 80 miles off the coast of Hsinchu, the heart of Taiwan's tech industry, the ocean begins to churn. A Type 055 Renhai-class destroyer slices through the waves, followed by a swarm of grey hulls. These include frigates, corvettes, and the white-hulled cutters of the China Coast Guard, now repurposed as the tip of the spear in a quarantine operation. It is a retreat strategy of unprecedented audacity. He will not just move his government, he will move the entire treasury. Under the cover of darkness, coolies labor under the watchful eyes of trusted officers to load heavy wooden crates onto the freighter Meifu. This is not a military transport, it is a desperate arc. Over the next few months, Chiang ships approximately 4 million tiles of gold across the rough waters of the Taiwan Strait. This gold shipment is the foundational act of modern Taiwan. Without it, the exiled KMT government would have collapsed into bankruptcy upon arrival. The bullion stabilizes the new Taiwan dollar, curbs hyperinflation, and pays the salaries of the 600,000 retreating soldiers. It buys time, which is the most precious commodity of all. Mao Zedong stands atop the Gate of Heavenly Peace on October 1st, 1949, and declares, "The Chinese people have stood up." The People's Republic of China is born, but Mao's gaze is fixed across the water. Taiwan remains the unliberated territory, the last refuge of the Chiang bandit. Mao travels to Moscow in the winter of 1949 to seek the blessing of Joseph Stalin. He wants Soviet air support and naval assistance to invade Taiwan. The transcripts of their meetings reveal a relationship defined by suspicion and calculation. Stalin, the shrewd architect of the Cold War, is cautious. He views Mao as a useful but reckless junior partner and is terrified of dragging the Soviet Union into a direct nuclear confrontation with the United States. In a secret cable, Stalin advises Mao that America, though it screams war, is actually afraid of war more than anything. Stalin refuses to commit Soviet forces to a Taiwan invasion. Instead, he deftly maneuvers the geopolitical chessboard by giving his blessing to Kim Il-sung of North Korea to invade the South. Stalin calculates that a war in Korea will distract the Americans and tie down U.S. forces. On June 25, 1950, North Korean tanks cross the 38th parallel and the Korean War begins. In Washington, President Harry Truman reads the invasion not as a local civil war, but as the opening salvo of a global communist offensive. He reverses U.S. policy instantly and declares the occupation of Formosa by communist forces would be a direct threat to Pacific security. Truman orders the U.S. 7th Fleet to enter the Taiwan Strait and neutralize it. Overnight, an insurmountable steel wall of American destroyers separates Mao's invasion force from Chiang's refuge. The invasion of Taiwan is cancelled, and the PLA troops massed on the coast are sent north to freeze in the mountains of Korea. Taiwan is saved not by its own defenses, but by the whims of a global chessboard. The status quo, a state of suspended civil war, is frozen in place. The island becomes an unsinkable aircraft carrier, a country but not a country, ruled by a government that claims to be China. Decades later, in July 1971, the air in a Beijing guest house is thick with cigarette smoke and unspoken leverage. Premier Zhou Enlai sits opposite Henry Kissinger, the U.S. National Security Advisor. Kissinger is officially in Pakistan recuperating from a stomach illness, but in reality, he has flown over the Himalayas to engineer a diplomatic coup. The objective is normalization. The U.S. wants to split the communist bloc using China as a wedge against the Soviet Union. But there is an elephant in the room named Taiwan. For 2 decades, the U.S. has recognized Chiang Kai-shek's regime in Taipei as the legitimate government of all China. Now Kissinger is prepared to trade that recognition for geopolitical advantage. The transcripts reveal Zhou Enlai is firm. The Taiwan question is the crucial question. We cannot accept 2 Chinas or 1 China, 1 Taiwan. Kissinger, the master of realpolitik, offers a concession that will haunt the region for 50 years. He assures Zhou that the U.S. does not support Taiwan independence and indicates that U.S. troops will be withdrawn. The Taiwan issue, Kissinger says, is a matter of time, not principle. He is planting the seeds of strategic ambiguity. Richard Nixon is in China in 1972, and the world is watching. Behind closed doors, diplomats haggle over a single sentence in the Shanghai communiqué. The Chinese demand that the U.S. recognize Beijing's sovereignty over Taiwan. The solution is a masterpiece of diplomatic fudge. The English text reads that the United States acknowledges that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain there is but 1 China. It states that the United States government does not challenge that position. Acknowledge implies the U.S. hears Beijing's claim but does not necessarily agree with it. However, the Chinese translation uses the word chengren, which carries a stronger meaning of recognize or accept. This deliberate mistranslation allows both sides to claim victory. Beijing tells its people the U.S. has accepted Taiwan is part of China. Washington tells its allies it has merely noted the claim. This ambiguity becomes the fragile foundation of peace. In December 1978, President Jimmy Carter announces that the U.S. will switch formal diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing. The Mutual Defense Treaty with Taiwan will be terminated. In Taipei, the news hits like a physical blow, and protesters hurl eggs at the US motorcade. The sense of betrayal is absolute as Taiwan is cast adrift, legally non-existent. But the US Congress, furious at being bypassed, strikes back by passing the Taiwan Relations Act, TRA, in April 1979. The TRA is a unique legislative creature. It treats Taiwan as a sovereign state for domestic law purposes, while confirming it is not a state diplomatically. Crucially, it mandates that the US will make available to Taiwan such defense articles as may be necessary to maintain a sufficient self-defense capability. It declares that any effort to determine Taiwan's future by non-peaceful means would be of grave concern. To further reassure Taiwan, President Ronald Reagan issues the 6 Assurances in 1982. In classified cables, Reagan promises Taiwan that the US has not set a date for ending arms sales. He also assures them the US has not agreed to consult with the PRC on those sales. The stage is set for the modern standoff. The US sells weapons to an island it doesn't recognize to defend it against a country it does recognize. All the while, it insists there is only one China. While diplomats argue over sovereignty, a quiet revolution is brewing in the rice paddies of Hsinchu. The Taiwanese government recruits Morris Chang, a 54-year-old executive from Texas Instruments, to modernize their electronics industry. Chang is a visionary who sees an inefficiency in the global semiconductor market. He proposes a radical new business model, the foundry. Chang establishes the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, in 1987. TSMC will not design chips. It will simply manufacture whatever chips other companies design. This allows fabless companies like Nvidia and Apple to exist without spending billions on factories. Nobody predicts that this startup will become the most strategic company on Earth. Over the next 3 decades, TSMC focuses maniacally on process engineering. By 2020, the world wakes up to a terrifying reality. TSMC manufactures 92% of the world's most advanced logic chips. The processor in the iPhone and the GPU training AI models all come from a few buildings in Hsinchu. This dominance gives rise to the silicon shield theory. It posits that China cannot invade Taiwan because doing so would destroy the factories China's own economy relies on. The world cannot let Taiwan fall because the global economy would collapse instantly. However, the shield is a double-edged sword. It makes Taiwan indispensable, but it also makes it a target. As the US-China tech war escalates, Washington begins to view reliance on Taiwan as an unacceptable national security risk. They pressure TSMC to build fabs in Arizona to de-risk the supply chain. To the Taiwanese, de-risking sounds a lot like abandonment. War does not begin with an explosion, it begins with a squeeze. The PLA, studying the failures of Russia in Ukraine, realizes that a D-Day-style invasion is too risky. Instead, they adopt gray zone tactics designed to exhaust Taiwan. Taiwanese officials call this the Anaconda strategy. Fleets of massive Chinese dredgers swarm the waters around Taiwan's outlying islands. They suck up sand from the ocean floor for Chinese construction projects, eroding coastlines and damaging infrastructure. This forces the Taiwanese Coast Guard to run endless, exhausting patrols to chase them off. In early 2023, and again in 2025, the undersea internet cables connecting the Matsu Islands to Taiwan are cut by Chinese vessels. The islands go dark. It is a dry run for a total communications quarantine. Inside Taiwan, the war is fought on smartphones via a cognitive warfare campaign. A narrative orchestrated by the CCP floods Taiwanese social media. It claims the US is using Taiwan as a pawn to weaken China. By 2025, Taiwan's internal politics are gridlocked. Opposition parties, fueled by this narrative, block defense spending bills. The military struggles to recruit as the country but not a country paradox weighs heavily on the youth. They compete in the Olympics as Chinese Taipei, their flag banned and their anthem silenced. Passports pose another humiliation, as Taiwanese citizens travel on documents many nations don't officially recognize. When arrested abroad, Beijing demands they be deported to China, claiming jurisdiction over them as Chinese nationals. The war in Ukraine changes the calculus in Moscow. Vladimir Putin, isolated by the West, turns to Xi Jinping. The No Limits partnership evolves into a transactional military alliance. Intelligence reports reaching the Pentagon are alarming. Russia is transferring its crown jewels of naval technology to China. The acoustical dampening designs of the Yasen M-class submarine. For decades, the PLA Navy had a weakness. Their submarines were loud. With Russian quieting technology, the new generation of Chinese submarines becomes nearly undetectable. In August 2025, a joint patrol of Russian and Chinese submarines disappears into the deep waters of the Philippine Sea. They are practicing sea denial to hunt U.S. aircraft carriers. Simultaneously, 2 Russian Tu-95 bombers and 2 Chinese H-6K bombers are intercepted flying in formation off the coast of Alaska. It is a historic first. Chinese bombers, capable of carrying nuclear payloads, are operating near the American homeland. The message from Beijing and Moscow is coordinated. The theater of conflict is global. If the U.S. intervenes in the Taiwan Strait, the war will come to the American coast. The signing of the Silicon Pact in January 2026 is the spark. Beijing announces Justice Mission 2026 and declares expansive exclusion zones around Taiwan for live-fire exercises. This is effectively a blockade. Commercial shipping insurance rates spike 500% overnight, and no tanker will enter the zone. Taiwan imports 98% of its energy, and its natural gas reserves are dangerously low. The clock starts ticking immediately. The PLA Navy deploys carrier strike groups to the east of Taiwan, severing the approach from Guam. The new Russian-enhanced submarines form a wolf pack picket line in the Bashi Channel. They lie in wait for the U.S. 7th Fleet. On land, the U.S. activates the 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment in Okinawa. These are small mobile units armed with anti-ship missiles mounted on unmanned trucks. They disperse to the small islands of the Ryukyu chain to choke the PLA Navy's exit routes. The report on the president's desk in the Situation Room is grim. The blockade has already caused a panic in global markets, crashing tech stocks by 40%. The Silicon Shield has shattered, idling assembly lines from Detroit to Munich. War games suggest that breaking the blockade will require striking the Chinese mainland to degrade missile batteries. But striking the mainland risks nuclear escalation. Japan's Prime Minister signals readiness to intervene, declaring a Taiwan emergency is a Japanese emergency. China responds with a warning that Japan has crossed a red line. The paradox is complete. The country that is not a country has become the center of the world. The gold of 1949 bought them time, and the silicon of 2000 bought them relevance. But relevance has a price. The president looks at the map as the USS Ronald Reagan steams towards the Luzon Strait. The Chinese submarines are waiting in the silence of the deep. Then Silicon Pact was meant to secure the future. Instead, it may have just accelerated the end of it. The paradox of Taiwan has become the hinge upon which the peace of the world turns.